I'm 28, a single dad to my daughter Ellie, who's 6 years old. We live in a small town where everyone knows each other, or at least it feels that way. Our home, a cozy little place, was a gift from my late parents. Christmas is Ellie's favorite time of year, and I always try to make it magical for her. It was 2 weeks before Christmas when this happened. Ellie and I had just spent the evening at the local Christmas fair. She wanted to ride the carousel and meet Santa at the booth set up near the entrance. After the rides, games, and overpriced hot cocoa, we made our way to Santa. The man dressed as Santa looked convincing. Big red suit, fluffy white beard, the whole package. Ellie was ecstatic. She eagerly told him she wanted a big dollhouse for Christmas. He laughed in that classic ho-ho-ho way, patted her on the head and said, "If you're good, you might just get it." Then his gaze shifted to me. His eyes lingered too long. "And what about you, Dad?" he asked. "What would you like for Christmas?" His tone was oddly playful but unsettling. I laughed it off, saying, "Just seeing Ellie happy is enough for me." He grinned, then said something that didn't sit right. "A good dad like you deserves to be rewarded. Maybe you'll get a special gift this year." Ellie waved goodbye, and we walked to the car. As I buckled her in, I glanced back toward Santa's booth. He was watching us, still smiling. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to a harmless old man doing his job. Later that night, Ellie was asleep upstairs while I was wrapping presents in the living room. I heard the faint sound of sleigh bells outside, followed by a soft knock at the door. I froze. It was past midnight and no one should have been visiting. I peeked through the peephole. It was Santa, the same man from the fair. He waved at the peephole, smiling, but there was something off. His eyes looked wild. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out, "What do you want?" "Ho, ho, ho," he chuckled, his voice muffled through the door. "You forgot something at the fair. Thought I'd bring it to you." "I didn't forget anything," I replied, my heart pounding. "Well, let me in, and I'll show you," he said, his tone suddenly darker. I told him to leave or I'd call the cops. There was silence for a moment, and then I heard the bells again, followed by heavy footsteps walking away. I double-checked that all the doors and windows were locked before going upstairs to Ellie's room. She was safe, sound asleep, clutching her stuffed reindeer. The next morning I found something on the porch, a crudely wrapped box with a tag that read, "To Ellie, from Santa." I hesitated but decided to open it before Ellie woke up. Inside was a porcelain doll, hand-painted, detailed, and disturbingly lifelike. It looked almost exactly like Ellie. I threw it away immediately. For the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I'd catch glimpses of a red suit outside the house at night or hear the faint jingle of bells. It wasn't until a neighbor's security camera caught footage of a man in a Santa suit lurking around our street that I decided to call the police. When they arrived, they took my report seriously, but found no trace of him. They did, however, find the doll I had thrown away, back on my porch, perfectly intact. After that, I sent Ellie to stay with my sister for a few weeks, and I stayed up every night keeping watch. The sightings stopped after Christmas, but I still don't feel safe. Some nights I hear faint sleigh bells in the distance, and every year on Christmas Eve I find a gift on my porch. I never open them. It was Christmas Eve in 2021, in the quiet suburbs of a small Pennsylvania town. The neighborhood was alive with holiday spirit, its streets glowing with festive lights. But beneath the cheer, something dark was brewing in the home of the Johnsons, a family of 4. Lisa and Greg Johnson had just returned from their annual Christmas Eve dinner at Grandma's house. They tucked their 2 young children into bed, their home filled with the soft hum of Christmas carols. But at midnight the doorbell rang, a sound that would shatter their lives. Standing at the door was a man dressed as Santa Claus. His red suit was worn, his fake beard slightly askew, and he carried an ominous sack slung over his shoulder. "Merry Christmas," he said with unsettling enthusiasm. "I'm here to spread some holiday cheer." Lisa hesitated, her instincts prickling. "It's late," she said nervously, keeping the door latched. "Oh, just delivering gifts I missed earlier," he said, tilting the sack. His gaze seemed to pierce her, sending chills down her spine. Before she could react, the man forced his way in. Chaos erupted as Lisa screamed, and Greg came running. The man pulled a crowbar from his sack and struck Greg with terrifying precision, leaving him unconscious on the floor. Lisa, shaking, pleaded, "Please don't hurt my children." The man leaned closer, his voice cold. "I don't want your kids. I want you to confess." "Confess to what?" Lisa stammered, her mind racing. "To what you took that didn't belong to you," he hissed. "You thought no one knew, didn't you? But I saw everything." Lisa was confused, until he reached into his sack and pulled out a doll. Not just any doll, but one eerily familiar to Lisa, the same one that had gone missing from an estate sale she attended weeks ago. It was the very doll rumored to carry a dark curse, the same one tied to Emily's tragic story from years before. The man placed the doll on the coffee table, its cracked porcelain face catching the glow of the Christmas tree lights. "You stole this," he said. "You didn't think the curse was real, did you?" Lisa's heart raced. She had indeed taken the doll, drawn to its strange allure, unaware of its sinister history. "It's just a doll," she whispered. The man's eyes darkened. "It's never just a doll. You brought something into your home, something that can't be undone." Suddenly the house felt alive. The Christmas lights flickered violently, and the doll's glassy eyes seemed to move. Upstairs, the children's cries turned into blood-curdling screams. Lisa bolted toward the stairs, but the man blocked her path. "It's too late," he said. "The doll maker always collects what's owed." Moments later, police arrived to a silent house, alerted by a neighbor who heard screams. Inside, they found Greg unconscious but alive. The children were unharmed but deeply shaken, claiming they saw Santa talking to the doll. As for Lisa, she was missing. The only trace left was the doll, sitting neatly on the coffee table, its cracked face smiling as if it had just witnessed something unspeakable. The man in the Santa suit was never identified, leaving behind only questions and a chilling legend about the cursed doll. Christmas Eve, a night of joy, family, and love. But in the snowy town of Ashwood, this Christmas was different. This Christmas was a nightmare. It began peacefully. Snow blanketed the streets, and lights glowed in every window. Families exchanged gifts and laughter, but just after midnight the peace was shattered. In a quiet house, a family prepared for Christmas morning. A mother and father wrapped gifts by the fire while their little girl slept upstairs. The home was warm, filled with the scent of pine and cookies. But at midnight, a scream tore through the air. Neighbors froze, peeking through frosted windows. The street outside was still, blanketed in snow. The scream was followed by silence. The next morning, the house was a crime scene. The parents were found under the Christmas tree, their bodies posed like lifeless dolls. The little girl's bed was empty. On the mantel stood a single nutcracker. Its painted smile was wide, too wide. 4 words were carved into the base: "A gift for the naughty." A seasoned detective arrived to investigate. The scene was eerie, but what stood out was the nutcracker. It seemed deliberate, almost like a signature. Then another body was found. Across town, a young boy was discovered in his living room. His body was posed the same way, and another nutcracker stood nearby. The detective realized both victims were part of Ashwood's secret Santa game. This wasn't random. Someone was targeting them, but why? The investigation led to whispers of an old story. Years ago, there was a toy maker in Ashwood who crafted handmade toys, dolls, trains, nutcrackers. He poured his heart into every piece. One Christmas, the town humiliated him. His toys were mocked, called creepy and old-fashioned. A wealthy woman at the holiday market spread rumors, saying his doll's eyes followed you and the nutcracker's smiles were cursed. The final insult came during a secret Santa exchange. One of the toy maker's nutcrackers was smashed in front of a crowd. People laughed, jeered, and called him a failure. Humiliated and broken, the toy maker left Ashwood. But before he disappeared, he left a warning carved into his workshop door: "Beware the gift of the forgotten." The town forgot him, but now it seemed he had returned. That night, the detective returned home to find a nutcracker on her doorstep. Her heart sank. She rushed inside, calling for her daughter, but the house was empty. Clues led her to an abandoned toy factory on the edge of town. Inside, the air was cold, and broken toys hung from the ceiling like ornaments. At the center of the room stood the toy maker, holding her daughter. "You don't understand," he said softly. "They ruined me. They ruined Christmas. Now they pay." The detective fought to save her child. The factory was a maze of traps and sharp tools. In the chaos, the toymaker fell into one of his own traps. His laughter echoed as he disappeared into the shadows. The detective saved her daughter and returned home. But Ashwood would never be the same. The Secret Santa game was canceled forever. Every Christmas, families locked their doors and stayed inside. Yet something still haunts the detective. On her daughter's shelf sits a nutcracker she didn't put there. Its smile is still too wide. And every Christmas she feels like someone is watching. Because in Ashwood, Christmas will never feel safe again. I'm a single mother of my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. When this happened, she was 5, and I was 27. We live in a house I inherited from my parents, located in a quiet neighborhood near the edge of the city. It was Christmas time, and Lily and I were out shopping for decorations and gifts. We spent hours wandering through the downtown shops, picking out trinkets and holiday ornaments. We even stopped by a small cafe for hot chocolate and cookies. As we headed to the parking lot, a man dressed as Santa Claus stood near the exit, waving and cheerfully greeting passers-by. He called out to us with a hearty "Merry Christmas" and knelt down to Lily's level. He asked her what she wanted for Christmas, and she excitedly told him about her wish for a dollhouse. Coincidentally, that was what I had already planned to get her. Santa chuckled and said, "Well, you've been a good girl this year, haven't you?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, and he smiled, glancing up at me. The conversation took an odd turn. He complimented me, saying, "You have a beautiful daughter, just like her mother." Lily giggled, though she didn't fully understand. I smiled politely, but felt a twinge of discomfort. Then he leaned closer and asked Lily, "Have you ever heard the song I Saw Mommy Kissing Santa Claus?" She nodded, and Santa turned to me, asking for a kiss on the cheek. Feeling awkward but not wanting to make a scene, I leaned in for a quick peck, but he suddenly turned his head, attempting to kiss me on the lips. I pulled back, startled and unsettled. Grabbing Lily's hand, I quickly muttered a goodbye and walked away, ignoring his overly enthusiastic "Merry Christmas" as we left. Driving home, I glanced back and noticed he was no longer at his post. I tried to shake off the discomfort, reasoning that he'd probably just gone on a break. At home, Lily and I decorated the tree while watching a Christmas movie. Everything felt normal until the doorbell rang. It was late, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I told Lily to stay put and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out. A man's voice replied, "It's Santa." My stomach dropped. I demanded he leave, but he claimed I had dropped something in the parking lot, and he was returning it. When I asked what it was, he hesitated, finally saying, a scarf, I think." His tone was off, too casual, too familiar. I told him I was calling the police, and after a moment of silence, I heard footsteps retreating. Still shaken, I contacted mall security the next day to report the incident. To my horror, they told me they hadn't hired anyone to play Santa in that area. Whoever he wasn't associated with the mall. That night, as I locked up the house, I heard faint laughter outside, low, gruff, and disturbingly familiar. Peeking through the curtains, I saw nothing but shadows. I called the police, who arrived and searched the area but found no one. They promised to keep an eye on the neighborhood, which offered little comfort. Days passed without incident, and I started to feel more at ease. Then, late one night, the doorbell rang again. Lily was asleep upstairs, and I froze, debating whether to answer. When I didn't, a soft tapping followed, first on the door, then on the living room window. My phone trembled in my hand as I dialed 911. The tapping stopped before the operator picked up, but I stayed on the line until the police arrived. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under the door. Inside was a handwritten note. "I hope you don't mind me finding your address. I couldn't stop thinking about you after our lovely chat. You and your daughter are truly special, and I'd love to get to know you better. I can tell you felt the spark too. I'm not a bad guy. I just know what I want and I go after it. Let's make this Christmas one to remember. P.S. I left my number in case you'd like to reach out. Best wishes, Derek." I felt sick reading it. I immediately called the police and handed over the note as evidence. They assured me they'd look into the man. A few days later, a detective called to inform me that they'd identified him and issued a warning to stay away from me. If he contacted me again, he'd face legal action. Thankfully, I never saw or heard from him again. But the experience left a lasting scar. What started as a festive outing with my daughter turned into a chilling reminder that even the most harmless looking encounters can hide something far more sinister.